Christmas Eve wrapped the town of Willow Creek in a storm that swallowed sound and light. Snow slashed across the lonely back road, thick enough to erase the world, until only the rumble of a black SUV moved through the white curtain. Inside, the air was heavier than the storm itself. It pressed on the chest of anyone who dared to breathe it. On the back seat sat Leo, 10 years old, small and quiet, a boy who never fit the mold others forced on him. His fingers clung to a worn cloth bag. Inside it, a photograph of his late mother and a small heart-shaped locket. Across from him, Serafina, his stepmother, exhaled clouds of perfume that masked her contempt. Her gaze was sharp, her words colder than the frost outside. She spoke of him as different, strange, something less than a real boy. David Lancaster, his father, sat in the front passenger seat. His hands were clenched so tight the veins on his knuckles rose. Once he had been a man others admired, but grief hollowed him out after the death of his wife. That grief became a chain, and Serafina held the key. When she spoke, he stayed silent. When she pushed, he never resisted. The SUV screeched to a halt. The back door swung open, snow blasted in, and Serafina's hand shoved Leo out into the freezing dark. The door slammed shut again, and the taillights disappeared into the storm. Leo stood alone on the road, body curled against the wind, the cloth bag pressed against his chest. His eyes did not shed tears. He only tightened his hold on the locket, as if letting go meant losing his mother all over again. Through the storm came another sound, tires grinding against snow, brakes screaming. A black sedan slid to a stop just feet away. From it stepped Edward Carter, a billionaire known more for headlines than for tenderness. But when he saw the small figure trembling in the snow, his instincts overpowered his reputation. With the help of his driver, Thomas, he lifted Leo from the icy ground and wrapped him in his own coat. Back inside the car, the boy whispered almost apologetically, "I don't want to be a burden." His voice was so faint it barely rose above the hum of the heater. Carter's eyes caught on the locket resting in Leo's hand. The face inside a woman's face he once knew. A face he once loved struck him like a bell tolling in the night. Memories he had buried under years of business and solitude resurfaced with brutal clarity. The sedan pulled away, its headlights carving through the white chaos, carrying with it a boy who had been thrown aside and a man who did not yet understand why fate had placed that child in his path. And so, on a night meant for miracles, a boy was abandoned by those who should have protected him, only to be found by someone whose past was tied to his more deeply than either of them yet knew. Sometimes life strips us down to nothing, so we can finally see the truth of love, not as an obligation, but as a choice. If you believe no child should ever feel discarded for being who they are, subscribe to Heart Stories and stay with us. The storm has only begun, and the truth hidden in the snow will shake more than one life before the night is over. The Carter estate glowed like a beacon against the storm. Beyond its gates, the mansion stood radiant with golden windows and the gentle hum of warmth, an island of safety in the endless white. Inside, the hush was broken only by the crackle of a fire and the soft clink of porcelain. Thomas guided the boy toward the velvet sofa, while a house physician checked his pulse, wrapped him in heated blankets, and nodded that he would recover from the cold. Leo lay still, half awake, as though uncertain whether safety was something real or simply another fleeting dream. His eyes traced every detail: the flicker of flames eating through logs, the shimmer of glass ornaments in the corner, the sound of slippers across polished marble. To him, it felt like entering a world not meant for children like him, children told to eat alone, to vanish when visitors came, to stay hidden because they were not normal. Edward Carter stood apart, hands clasped behind his back. His gaze kept returning to the small locket now placed on the table beside Leo. The photograph within it did not merely stir a memory, it unlocked a flood. The woman's face, tender yet tired, was one he had loved with every part of his youth. She had been the light in a life otherwise consumed by deals and deadlines, until time and mistakes tore them apart. Now her likeness lay in front of him, carried by a boy shivering under his roof. As the physician left, Leo finally whispered what had been building inside him, not to ask for pity, but because silence had become unbearable. He spoke of a home that was never truly his, of meals eaten behind closed doors, of Serafina's commands that he stay invisible when company came. He told of her sharp reminders that he was unlike other boys, reminders pressed into him until they felt like chains. Each word trembled, but not from the cold. Carter listened without interruption. The weight of every sentence pressed into his chest, heavier than any empire he had built. When Leo's words fell away, Carter turned toward Thomas and gave a simple order. Arthur! The name belonged to a man who never missed a thread, an investigator whose precision cut through lies like glass. That same evening, Arthur began his search. He unearthed hospital records from years past, worn and incomplete, but carrying a trail of signatures. Payments had been made under Serafina's name, not donations, but bribes. A doctor had accepted them in exchange for prescribing supplements that carried risks no expectant mother should have faced. And as Arthur pulled further, another pattern emerged. Maintenance records from David's vehicle bore recent alterations. Parts tied to the braking system had been tampered with, each signature disguised but traceable back to the same hand that signed the bribes. By the time Arthur returned with his first findings, the night was deep and the snow continued to fall. Carter stood by the fire once more, watching the boy breathe evenly in sleep. Leo's hand rested over the locket, even in dreams unwilling to let it go. The house, usually silent, now felt charged with the hum of an approaching storm, not the one raging outside, but one born of secrets and betrayal. In that quiet, Carter whispered only to himself. He had seen power destroy, greed corrupt, and lies bury lives beyond recognition. Yet here was a child paying the price of sins never his to carry. A child told that being different made him unworthy. The thought carved itself deep into Carter's heart. What people call different often only means brave enough to be true. And as the snow blanketed Willow Creek in silence, the mansion held its breath. For now, Leo slept, safe within walls strong enough to guard him. But beyond those walls, danger had already been set in motion, and the first clue had revealed that this story was never about a single night. It was about years of deception, and the war between cruelty and love that was only just beginning. The storm eased with dawn, but the danger had only sharpened. On the twisting mountain road outside Willow Creek, David Lancaster's car moved toward its fate. The steering wheel trembled beneath his hands, though he told himself it was only the ice. At the next descent, when the brake pedals sank to the floor without resistance, the truth hit him like a blade. The car slid, skidding toward the edge. His heart thundered, and for a split second, he saw not the road but the accusing eyes of the woman he once promised to protect. But the crash never came. A makeshift barrier of steel blocked the curve installed hours earlier by Arthur, who stood in the road with a camera strapped to his chest. Every detail was recorded: the useless brake pedal, the grinding of metal, David's face drained of all color. The evidence was undeniable. The plan had been to silence him in a staged accident, and the mastermind was already known. That night, under the roof of the Carter estate, truth was no longer avoidable. The grand dining room, once a place of opulence, became a chamber of reckoning. Leo sat close to Thomas, his small shoulders hunched as if bracing against an invisible storm. Arthur laid documents across the long table: the bribed prescriptions that poisoned Leo's mother, the falsified records of tampered brakes, and files from decades earlier revealing the collapse of a construction project built by the Lancaster Company. That collapse had taken the lives of Serafina's parents. Her voice broke the silence. It carried no remorse, only fury. She spoke of vengeance carefully nurtured, of marrying David not for love, but for punishment. She wanted his legacy ruined, his child discarded, his guilt magnified. Her confession was half confession, half triumph. But when she drew the knife hidden in her sleeve, triumph turned to violence. The blade flashed toward Carter, In an instant, David lunged between them. The strike caught his arm, crimson spilling across the tablecloth. For the first time in years, he acted not as a man bound by grief, but as a father standing in front of his son. The room erupted. Officers, alerted by Arthur, stormed in. The clatter of cuffs snapped around Serafina's wrists as she screamed curses into the night. When silence finally returned, David collapsed to his knees. His voice cracked, thin as ash. "Let me begin again." For Leo, the words were less a plea than a surrender, not to Serafina, not to Carter, but to the truth he had long buried. The man who once turned away now stood broken but willing to rebuild, even if every brick cut his hands. Leo's eyes were wide, uncertain. He had been taught that weakness defined his father, that silence was his signature. Yet tonight, as David had stepped forward into the path of a blade, the image burned itself into Leo's memory, proof that even a coward can choose differently once. As dawn touched the mansion's windows, the weight of betrayal lingered, but another current moved beneath it. For Leo, the lesson was quiet but firm. People can be consumed by revenge until they lose their humanity, but others can awaken in a single act of courage. One knife had revealed both the cruelty that seeks destruction and the fragile bravery that seeks redemption. And in that difference lay the line between a family shattered forever and one that might, just might, begin to heal. Night returned with another kind of storm. This time, it was not snow, but fever that ravaged the boy. Leo's small frame trembled under blankets, his face pale, his skin burning with unnatural heat. Carter paced the sterile hospital hallway as monitor beeped in rhythm with the frailty of a life too young to face such darkness. Doctors gathered, their voices calm but edged with urgency. Leo's liver was failing. Without a transplant, there would be no tomorrow. Tests were rushed, blood drawn, charts compared, hope measured in numbers. Carter's chest ached as he waited, fists pressed into his temples. He had money enough to command the best surgeons, the best facilities. Yet none of it mattered if no donor could be found. When the results came, the weight of fate fell unevenly. Carter's health, already marked by a mild liver condition, made him ineligible for the immediate procedure. Only David's body matched perfectly. The father who had abandoned his courage for so long was now the only one who could give his son another chance at life. The decision did not stretch into debate. David signed the papers with steady hands. In the quiet before the surgery, he asked to see Leo. The boy was half conscious, eyes fluttering open beneath the hum of machines. David sank to his knees beside the bed. His voice cracked, raw and stripped of pride. "I was a coward before. I let silence and fear guide me. But not this time. This time I will stand for you." His words were not polished, yet they carried the weight of truth. Carter stood nearby, unable to move closer, as if the scene belonged to them alone. Still, his chest tightened. In David's broken promise renewed, he recognized something deeper than rivalry or resentment. He saw a man finally rising from his failures. The surgery began. Bright lights flooded the operating room and as masks hid the faces of those fighting for Leo's life. Hours passed, time measured only in the rise and fall of monitors and the low murmur of surgeons. Outside, Carter sat rigid, eyes locked on the red glow above the theater doors. Thomas stayed by his side, offering no words, only presence. When the light finally dimmed and the lead surgeon stepped out, his expression carried relief. The transplant had succeeded. Days later, reporters swarmed the hospital steps. Cameras clicked, microphones thrust forward, hungry for a narrative. The press conference laid the truth bare. Serafina, charged with attempted murder and conspiracy, Arthur's evidence stacked against her like stones. And David, though recognized for saving his son's life, confessed publicly to his own past, the construction shortcuts that had stolen lives years before. He asked no forgiveness, only to face his sentence with honesty. His prison term would be shortened in light of his act of sacrifice, but punishment remained. Inside, Leo slept with color slowly returning to his cheeks. his hand curled around the locket, as if he knew his mother's spirit had not left him. Beside him sat Carter, who had discovered that wealth could not solve everything, but presence and devotion could. The world outside saw scandal, crime, injustice abide. But within the hospital room, a deeper lesson unfolded. Redemption is never sealed in words alone. It is written in actions, especially when those actions demand pain and loss. A father once paralyzed by fear had finally chosen courage, and through that choice, his son breathed again. In the quiet of that moment, it became clear love is not proven by perfection, but by the willingness to suffer for another's chance to live. Years passed like chapters in a book that refused to close. The blizzard of that Christmas Eve became a story told in whispers, yet its echoes shaped the life of Leo Lancaster. At 20, he stood not as the fragile child once abandoned in snow, but as a young man who carried both scars and strength. On a brightly lit television stage, he faced the world with steady eyes. Cameras blinked red, capturing every word as he declared his truth: he was gay, and he would not hide. With that, he announced the launch of the Snowlight Foundation, a sanctuary for children cast aside for being who they were. Applause rose, and in the front row, Edward Carter watched with pride. The billionaire who once stumbled upon a boy in the snow now stood as his guardian, mentor, and, though unspoken, something more. Thomas sat beside him, holding a sealed envelope, its wax cracked, but its message still intact. He had waited until this moment, until Leo had claimed his voice before the world. After the broadcast, in a quiet room away from the cameras, Thomas placed the letter in Carter's hands. Its paper was yellowed, its edges worn. The handwriting belonged to a woman whose memory had never faded. Carter unfolded it slowly, his breath catching as he read the words. In the letter, she confessed what fate had hidden. Leo was not David's son by blood. He was Carter's own child, conceived in love before heartbreak and illness tore them apart. She had chosen to marry David when Carter's life collapsed under the weight of failure and a liver condition that left him unfit to carry the burdens of family. David had promised to protect mother and son, and she had believed that was the safest path. Her final request was simple: if Edward ever crossed paths with Leo, he must love him as he once loved her. The revelation shattered Carter's composure. Years of restraint crumbled as tears welled in his eyes. When the truth was confirmed by testing, it did not bring triumph, only a deeper ache for time already lost. Yet before despair could claim him, Leo stepped forward, wrapping his arms around both men. "I have two fathers," he whispered, voice steady. "One gave me life, and one gave me a life worth living." In that embrace, David, released early from prison for good conduct, stood not as a rival, but as a man redeemed by sacrifice. He devoted himself to volunteering at Snowlight, guiding children who bore the same wounds as Leo once did. Carter became the visible pillar, funding safe homes and shelters across the country. And Leo, no longer a boy shivering in the dark, became the face of hope for countless others. Serafina's name lived only in court records, a cautionary tale of vengeance consuming itself. But the lesson she left was indelible hatred multiplies suffering, while love, even when delayed, can rebuild what was broken. The image of that night never left Leo's snow swallowing the road, headlights blinding, a sudden hand pulling him back from nothingness. It was proof that even in the darkest storms, light can find its way through, carried not by miracles alone, but by people who choose compassion when it matters most. So now, dear listener, imagine this: if one kind word, one brave act, could save a child standing alone in the cold. Would you offer it? Tell us in the comments. Type Snowlight if you believe every child deserves to be seen and loved. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Heart Stories and share it, so that together we can spread the truth that families are not only built by blood, but by the courage to love without conditions.